Usually when we think about a massive disruption, let's say um, a power grid failing in a major metropolitan city, right? We just assume the solution is purely structural.
Yeah, you bring in the giant industrial backup generators.
Exactly. You reroute the electrical lines and boom, the lights come back on. It is a very clean technical fix for a technical problem.
Right, and it's a very comforting way to view the world, honestly.
Mm.
The infrastructure is broken, so you just replace the infrastructure. Problem solved.
But imagine what happens when you turn those lights back on and you realize the people inside the building are completely frozen.
Oh, yeah.
They aren't going back to their desks, they aren't functioning because they fundamentally no longer believe the building itself is safe.
They're terrified.
Right. Suddenly, your multi-million-dollar technical fix is completely useless. Why? Because you ignored the psychological reality of the people you were trying to help.
Which is exactly what happens.
And we are exploring that exact tension today. But instead of a citywide blackout, we are looking at education. And instead of a broken power grid, we are looking at the realities of an active war zone.
Yeah, the source we are unpacking today is this deeply insightful academic paper. It's titled Double Loop Learning Shifting Students' Mindsets in War Zones, and it's authored by Konkidi Fusavad and Mohamed Buheji.
It's a heavy one, but so important.
It really is.
Mhm.
They investigate how prolonged military conflict creates these profound psychological barriers to learning and why our traditional, high-tech educational solutions just shatter under that immense pressure.
Before we jump into the deep end, I just need to make something very clear regarding the context of this paper for you listening. The authors use the 2026 U.S.-Israeli-Iran war and its cascading impacts on the Gulf Cooperation Council states and other regions as their primary case study. And we need to explicitly state that we are impartially reporting the author's findings, their data, and their specific examples regarding this conflict purely to convey the academic ideas contained in the source material. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, and we are absolutely not taking any sides.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is simply to look at the educational and psychological science of human behavior under extreme duress.
Exactly.
Because the data gives us this incredibly clear picture of what happens to the human mind when survival becomes the only priority.
Okay, let's unpack this. War doesn't just destroy physical infrastructure. It doesn't just, bomb schools or burn libraries. The core premise of this paper is that war destroys the fundamental invisible assumptions that make learning meaningful in the first place.
And to really understand the mechanics of that destruction, we have to look at the attempted solution first.
The technical fix.
Right. When the 2026 conflict escalated, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, so we're talking Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, they mobilized their digital infrastructure. And they actually had a massive advantage going into this.
They did.
They possessed some of the most sophisticated e-learning platforms in the developing world. Systems like Madrasati in Saudi Arabia or EdNet in Bahrain.
So they essentially applied the backup generator fix. The physical classrooms were dangerous or inaccessible, so they just fired up the servers.
Yeah, and on paper, it was a staggering logistical success. Within weeks, millions of students were shifted to online portals. Recorded lectures were uploaded, digital assignments were distributed. I mean, the curriculum continued.
But the reality was different.
Well, completely. When the researchers actually looked at the engagement data, it told a totally different story.
Yeah.
Engagement absolutely plummeted. Students were logging on mechanically just to avoid being penalized.
Just a completely hollow metric.
Yeah. The cameras were universally off. Participation was essentially zero. They were physically present in the digital room, but psychologically, they had entirely checked out.
I really want to spend some time on why that happened because it's counterintuitive to how we usually view technology, isn't it? We think, well, the information is right there on the screen, just absorb it.
That's the assumption, yeah.
But the paper points to a specific theoretical framework by a theorist named Chris Argyris to explain this massive disconnect. It's this concept of single-loop learning.
Right, single-loop learning. It's basically the operating system of almost every e-learning platform in existence. It is all about procedural correction.
Okay, break that down for us.
So it asks questions like, how do I master this specific algebra formula? Or how do I improve my grade on this history essay? It spots an error, and it corrects it within a pre-existing set of goals.
It's like Relying on a single-loop e-learning platform in a war zone is like giving someone highly detailed GPS driving directions when they are actively questioning why they should even be driving toward a bridge that's currently collapsing.
That is a perfect analogy.
Like, the directions might be perfectly accurate, the satellite technology is flawless, but it is completely irrelevant to the existential crisis the driver is facing.
What's fascinating here is what that technology fundamentally lacks when confronted with trauma.
Mm.
The paper introduces this idea of an emotional bank account.
An emotional bank account. I like that.
Yeah, and a slick user interface or a pre-recorded video lecture, it has a zero balance in its emotional bank account.
Right.
It cannot adjust its tone when a student's face suddenly drops. It cannot sit in a quiet, reassuring silence with a child who just lost their home.
It's totally blind to context.
Exactly. It completely misses the tacit dimensions of communication, all those unspoken, nonverbal reassurances that a physically present, empathetic teacher provides just by breathing in the same room.
And the UI itself, the user experience of these platforms, it actually triggers anxiety, doesn't it? The paper argues that applying the single-loop, grade-focused system during a crisis isn't just ineffective, it can actively do psychological harm.
It really can. Put yourself in the sensory reality of one of these students. You have just spent 14 hours in a concrete bomb shelter. You are listening to sirens. You have no guarantee that your neighborhood will have electricity tomorrow, let alone safety.
It's unimaginable stress.
And suddenly your e-learning module pings with an automated notification. You have an incomplete quiz. Complete by midnight. Your grade depends on it.
Honestly, it feels completely detached from reality. It's almost insulting.
It is deeply insulting to the nervous system. The physiological response to that pinging notification isn't motivation. It's alienation.
Because it's ignoring what they're going through.
Right. It signals to the student that the system does not see their reality. It tells them your survival, your fear, your life, none of it fits into our algorithm. So tying learning to performance-based grades in a war zone actually reinforces their hopelessness.
To really grasp the mechanics of why this digital face failed so spectacularly, we need to look under the hood at what is happening to a student's brain when they are under fire. The authors use a diagnostic lens called self-determination theory, or SDT.
Yes, SDT. It's a robust framework for understanding human motivation. It posits that for any human being to be intrinsically motivated to actually want to learn or grow, three basic psychological needs must be met.
And those are?
Autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Let's break those down because war systematically dismantles all three of them. Let's start with autonomy. That's your sense of choice, right? Your volition.
Yes, it's the feeling that you have a say in your own life. In a war zone, autonomy is obliterated overnight. Curfews dictate when you can step outside. Displacement forces you out of your home.
You're just reacting.
Exactly. You are subjected to constant surveillance and military presence. You have zero control over your physical movements.
Then there's competence. The sense of mastery, the belief that if you practice something, you will get better at it. But how can you plan, practice, or improve when your daily life is entirely unpredictable?
You can't.
When the school you went to yesterday is literally rubble today and the resources you relied on vanish instantly, your competence is totally undermined. You can't master an environment that is constantly changing the rules.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
And finally, relatedness. That is the fundamental human need for belonging and connection. War severs the social fabric. Teachers are displaced to different cities. Your peers and friends are scattered.
Families are separated.
Right. The community network that tells a child you belong here is just torn apart.
So you have a brain that has been stripped of choice, stripped of mastery, and stripped of connection. And to ground this in the brutal reality of the 2026 conflict, the paper provides some staggering economic statistics that the students are witnessing firsthand.
Yeah, these numbers are heavy.
In just the first month alone, the economic spillovers of the conflict caused $186 billion in economic losses. 3.7 million jobs were wiped out. 4 million people were pushed into poverty.
A student looks around at that sensory reality, right? A collapsed labor market, extreme poverty, the constant physical threat of violence, and they do a subconscious, highly rational calculation.
A survival calculation.
Exactly. Why should I invest mental energy into memorizing history dates if there are no jobs to get, no safety to rely on, and seemingly no future to plan for?
So what does this all mean? This brings us to a massive aha moment in the paper for me. Usually when we see a student's grades drop or their engagement vanish in a conflict zone, administrators label it academic underachievement.
Yeah, they blame the student.
Right, they assume the student is failing the system. But the authors argue that this isn't a failure of the student's ability at all. It is a completely rational adaptation to an irrational, violent environment.
Spot on. In behavioral psychology, this is known as learned helplessness. When you are repeatedly exposed to negative situations that you cannot control, you develop a generalized expectation that no matter what you do, your actions cannot influence your outcomes.
It's a defensive mechanism.
Yes. If studying doesn't keep the missiles away and getting an A on a digital quiz doesn't put food on the table, the most logical, energy-conserving choice for your brain is to simply disengage.
Wow. Okay, so if single loop learning, just blindly telling students to study harder and checking their math if that fails against the sheer weight of learned helplessness, what on earth is the antidote?
The antidote the paper presents is double-loop feedback. If single-loop learning corrects actions within a preset goal, double-loop learning stops the machine and questions the governing assumptions and the goals themselves.
It addresses the why.
Yes, it tackles the existential, why should I try it all, head on. For a student who firmly believes education is futile, giving them feedback on a misplaced decimal point in algebra is useless.
Obviously.
You must first provide a type of feedback that rebuilds their core belief that learning can actually produce meaning, safety, or connection, even amidst total chaos. The co-author of the paper, Mohamed Buheji, frames this incredibly well. He calls it semantic sovereignty.
Semantic sovereignty, reclaiming your own meaning. I love the concept, but let me push back here because practically speaking, this sounds incredibly tricky to pull off.
Oh, it is.
If I'm an educator and I have a traumatized, hyper-vigilant student sitting in front of me, I can't just walk up to them and say, hey, I know the world is literally burning outside, but you really need to find your semantic sovereignty.
Right, no.
That sounds patronizing.
Yeah.
It sounds like a motivational poster hanging in a bomb shelter. You can't just command a traumatized brain to find meaning.
This raises an important question, and you've hit on the exact crux of the author's pedagogical approach. You are entirely right. You cannot lecture someone into feeling safe. Double-loop feedback is inherently indirect. It is enacted, not spoken. Yeah. You provide sensory experiences and relational cues that allow the student's own nervous system to discover that their assumption of total hopelessness might be incomplete.
So how does a teacher actually enact that? What does it look like in a room?
The paper outlines several characteristics of this survival pedagogy, and the first one is just profound in its simplicity: relational presence.
Relational presence is largely nonverbal. A student who has experienced violence is constantly scanning their environment for threats. Their amygdala is in overdrive.
Just waiting for the next bad thing.
Exactly. So an educator who simply maintains a calm physical posture, who sits at a respectful distance, who lowers the volume and cadence of their voice, they're communicating safety to that student's nervous system without delivering a single word of academic instruction.
Wow.
The feedback answers the student's internal subconscious question, which is this environment dangerous? And the teacher's steady body language says, no, right here, right now, in this small space, you are safe. That leads directly into the next strategy the authors observed, which is about narrative coherence, because uncertainty breeds hopelessness, right? When your daily life feels like a random series of chaotic horrors, you lose your sense of self. To combat that, educators use what the paper calls strategic meaning engineering.
It's a fascinating technique. Teachers help students construct a coherent timeline of their life to impose order on the chaos.
How so?
Well, they might ask a student to bring in a personal object,
What?
like a broken toy, a surviving diary, maybe a specific photograph, and they ask them to associate it with an emotion or a memory.
Grounding them.
Yeah, by helping the student narrate their trauma, but also highlighting moments of their own survival and agency, the teacher provides indirect, double-loop feedback. The feedback is, your life is not just random violence. It is a continuous story, and you still have the power to be the author of it.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. When the world outside is violently unpredictable, mundane routines suddenly become incredibly powerful tools for survival. The paper highlights an incredible study of Ukrainian teachers during active shelling.
Oh, the data there was striking.
It really was.
The Ukrainian teachers who managed to maintain regular online class schedules, even when severe disruptions like air raids were happening, They saw significantly higher student retention than those who taught sporadically or asynchronously.
Paint that picture for a second. You have a teacher who turns their webcam on at 9:00 a.m. every single Tuesday. You can perhaps hear sirens in the background, but the teacher is there, the Zoom room is open.
Yeah.
The act of sticking to the schedule is the feedback. It implicitly communicates time still has structure, learning still matters enough to show up, you still belong to this routine. It directly challenges the student's assumption that chaos has won.
But to maintain that routine, you have to fundamentally shift your goals. You can't expect the routine to be about grading calculus. You move from performance goals to relational and survival goals.
Right. The teacher isn't asking, did you memorize the periodic table? They are asking, did you help a classmate today? Did you manage to write one single sentence in your journal this morning? You completely change the definition of success from academic performance to shared humanity.
Which naturally facilitates another massive shift, which is peer solidarity.
Yeah.
Isolation is the engine of hopelessness. In Gaza, researchers observed displaced learners forming these organic peer learning circles. When a student who has lost everything sits down and explains a basic concept to a fellow displaced student, something profound happens in their brain.
It completely changes the structure of education. We are so used to a vertical system, right? Where the authority figure at the top, the teacher dispenses knowledge and grades the student at the bottom. But this is a horizontal system.
Right.
Peers are validating peers.
Exactly. When a student teaches a peer, they receive two vital pieces of tacit, double-loop feedback that strike right at the heart of learned helplessness. First, you are competent enough to teach someone else, which restores that lost sense of competence.
Yep.
And second, you belong to a community that needs you, which restores relatedness.
And while that solidarity is building, the educators have to constantly model emotional regulation. They don't indulge in toxic positivity. They don't pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't.
No, you can't fake it.
A teacher might explicitly say, when that siren went off, my heart started racing and I felt scared too. But here's what I did to calm my body down. The paper highlights techniques like the survive checklist, or something as simple as taking 3 deep regulated breaths together.
It's so grinding.
The feedback isn't don't be afraid. The feedback is your fear is entirely normal and your biological responses are manageable.
We've talked a lot about these conceptual pillars, but the logistical question remains. How does a massive, rigid school district practically retrain their teachers to do this on a Tuesday morning? How do you implement this at scale?
Right, because you can't just hand a teacher a theoretical psychology paper and say good luck today.
The authors propose integrating this into daily routines through a continuous flow they call the CARE cycle. C-A-R-E. Calm, attend, relate, engage.
Okay, walk us through it.
It isn't a rigid checklist. It's
Yeah.
a way of being in the classroom. First, calm. The educator regulates their own nervous system first to model safety. Second, attend. The educator actively notices and acknowledges the student's emotional state, not just their academic output.
So they feel seen.
Exactly. This directly challenges the student's underlying assumption that they are invisible to the system. Third, relate. The educator connects the lesson material to the student's actual lived reality. And fourth, engage. Inviting very small, highly achievable participation.
Like what?
Like, can you read just one sentence, or can you point to the answer? You dismantle the architecture of learned helplessness one tiny success at a time.
They also talk about problem-based learning, or PBL, as a highly effective tool here. It's about having students solve immediate, relevant problems in their actual environment. The example the paper gives is having students figure out how to purify water using very limited scavenged materials.
The brilliance of problem-based learning in a crisis is that the feedback is undeniable and intrinsic.
It's physical.
Yeah, if the water's still dirty, you try a different filter material. If water is clean, you succeeded. You don't need a teacher to give you an arbitrary letter grade. It directly attacks the assumption of helplessness because the student gets immediate physical sensory proof that they can alter their environment. They realize they still possess agency.
So, stepping back to where we started, where does all that expensive, pre-existing e-learning technology fit into this, the madrasatas and the ednets? Do we just scrap the multi-million-dollar platforms?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the technology is absolutely not useless, but its role must be radically redefined. The paper proposes a hybrid model. Digital platforms are incredibly efficient at handling single-loop functions, like delivering the curriculum content, providing practice exercises, maintaining a centralized record.
They provide the GPS directions.
Precisely. But the double-loop, functions the relational presence, the strategic meaning engineering, the emotional modeling that must be handled by a trained human being.
Right, you can't automate that.
Whether that is face-to-face in a shelter or in small real-time video groups where the teacher can actually read the room, you simply cannot code passive empathy into a software module. Educational systems need to invest heavily in training their teachers to be double-loop facilitators, not just platform administrators checking engagement metrics.
The psychological insights here are just profoundly moving, and for you listening, I want to bring this right to your front door. You might not be sitting in an active war zone. You might be listening to this on your commute or at your desk, but the core principles of double loop learning and semantic sovereignty are entirely universal.
They really are.
They are the absolute foundation of what developmental psychologists call hardiness.
Hardiness is built on four distinct pillars, often called the four C's: commitment, control, challenge, and countermeasure. Commitment is the deep knowledge that you aren't isolated. Control is the belief that your daily actions actually influence your outcomes.
Right.
Challenge is the mental flexibility to view sudden obstacles as problems to solve rather than insurmountable threats. And countermeasure is knowing you have a toolkit to take action.
And double loop feedback is the forge that builds all four of those traits. This isn't just about figuring out how to pass a math test while under fire. It is about building a lifelong resilient identity as a learner. It's about equipping the human mind to survive any VUCA environment, a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Ultimately, it's about maintaining semantic sovereignty in your own life. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a completely different angle to ponder. We've established that true double-loop feedback requires genuine human empathy, tacit understanding, and a shared emotional bank account. But look at the trajectory of our educational systems right now. We are rushing to integrate artificial intelligence into every classroom, creating hyper-personalized, ultra-efficient, single-loop learning machines. But if a shattered worldview can only be repaired by the physical, empathetic presence of another human being, can an AI ever truly provide double-loop feedback? Or are we just building an even more sophisticated illusion of the digital fix?
That is a brilliant question. Are we just plugging a more advanced backup generator into a building that the occupants still believe is collapsing? Sometimes the fix isn't technical at all. Sometimes the fix requires questioning the foundation of what it means to connect. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the why behind the what, and we will see you next time.